Hello everyone, and welcome to the Phase 2 Emerging Preferences and Choices webinar for Verity Close. My name is Alfie Peacock, and I am the Assistant Project Manager at the Lancaster West Neighbourhood Team, and I'll be chairing this evening's meeting. I'd like to thank you all for coming along to discuss the planned refurbishment of your homes. Just some quick housekeeping before we start. The meeting is being recorded for residents who can't attend, and it'll be put on our communication channels after this evening. Please keep yourself on mute unless you are speaking. We do encourage cameras being on if you're comfortable with that, of course. We also encourage the hands up function to speak, or feel free to add questions in the chat, and we can interrupt as and when. Next slide, please, Molly. So let me do a quick introduction of the Lancaster West team working on the external refurbishment of your estate. This includes the thermal upgrades for the windows, walls and ventilation. Many of you will have met James Caspel, our neighbourhood director. Also here today is Andres Loizu, Bumi Shikoni, myself, Angus Drake and Janet Hall. And I'm sure you'll hear from most of us before the end of this evening. So I'll just hand over to the architects for Verity Close ECD, so you can run through and introduce yourselves.
Hi, I'm Lizzie and I'm an Associate Director at ECD, and I've been working on the designs for Verity Close, and it's been great meeting and hearing from many of you already. And I've got several colleagues with me here who will introduce themselves. Hopefully.
I jump in. So hello everybody, I'm Laura, and I've been working on Verity since last summer, and I'll pass it over to Maria maybe.
Perhaps she's having technical difficulties, but my colleague Phoebe is also here.
Yeah, hi, I'm Phoebe and I'm an architectural assistant. We've been working on Verity for the last few months.
Great.
Okay. Sorry, hopefully it'll be okay. I'm Maria. I'm a senior associate at ECD, and I've been working with the rest of my colleagues, in the design of the close. So I'm looking forward to having a discussion with all of you and to present our work. So hopefully you'll like it and you'll be able to make choices. Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Just to add, Molly, if you want to run to the next slide. So the meeting will last around an hour and will run as follows. The Neighbourhood Director of Lancaster West, James Caspel, will give a brief overview of the CoDesign Timeline. He'll be followed by ECD, who have been working on the refurbishment, and they will first run through the feedback following Phase 1's initial design ideas last year, and following that, present the design proposals which have been informed by your feedback. You have the opportunity to ask questions and share your views throughout the session. Feel free to put your questions and comments in the chat or raise your virtual hand to ask more directly. So without further ado, I'll hand over to James Caspel.
Thanks, Alfie, and thanks for residents joining us today, and for those of you watching on our We Are W11 app. We're really excited to share with you the first of 6 emerging preferences and choices options for different parts of the estate. We're starting with Verity Close, as we have done so many times before. Verity Close is, of course, home to our first low energy home in Kensington and Chelsea. It was where we started our first open house session as well, and it's also where we started our top 10s. So I'm going to do a little bit of a recap of the journey so far, and I'm going to hand over to Lizzie, Maria and the team, who are going to share with you some really exciting design options. So next slide, please, Molly. So in terms of the CoDesign timeline, it has been a long process, but it's been a diligent process, and one in which we've tried as much as possible to ensure that residents have a voice, and we truly deliver the resident-led refurbishment of Verity Close. So that starts with some initial consultation, which began shortly after the Grenfell Tower tragedy, and 2 really high-profile ideas days where, what some of you will remember, literally hundreds of people at Kensington Leisure Centre setting out a vision for what a 21st century model estate might look like. through 2019 and 2020. At that point, we didn't have a significant amount of funding to meet the shared ambition. And some of you will have participated in our top 10s process, which I'll go on to in a moment. We've used that and we've used the momentum from residents who've engaged with us to successfully secure additional funding. And so that we're really pleased today to present to you the options to ensure that we don't just have one low energy home on Verity Close, but that all tenants and leaseholders in Verity Close have the opportunity for the highest possible standards. We've held a number of initial design ideas pop-ups through 2021. We didn't let the pandemic knock us off course with that regard. And what we've done today is use the feedback from those initial design ideas, engagement events, to present to you the emerging preferences and choices which you're going to work with Linda and the team in selecting what will the 21st century refurbished Verity Close look like. What we'll do over the next month is work with you at your convenience and in a way that suits you, whether that's online, face-to-face, over the phone, and so on. We'll talk a bit about that at the end. And then that's going to go into the finalising the detailed designs for Verity Close. So what that means is what building elements are we going to select? What is the future of Verity Close going to look like? And then we can use that to bring on board the contractors who will work over the months and years ahead to transform Verity Close to meet the shared vision that we're going to create together. So I'll just remind us, if we go on to the next slide, Molly, in terms of the top 10s, we're going to talk a lot today about the fabric elements of Verity Close and the heating and hot water. So although kitchens and bathrooms is absolutely a priority, that's something that we've already worked with residents to co-design in terms of providing 12 different choices of kitchen, for example, and 150 different ways in which we have improved our internal new home standard. So we're not going to focus on all of that today. We're going to be focusing on wall insulation, roofs, windows, ventilation, and particularly in terms of the heat network as well. That doesn't mean that other elements won't get covered, and we'll pick them up over the weeks and months ahead. And I'm really pleased to be able to say that pretty much everything that's on the top 10s there for Verity Close are now within touching distance of being able to be delivered. So that's all from me. More than happy for us to take questions as we go along. Either pop your hand up or put it in the chat. And then I will hand over to Lizzie from ECD, who's going to take us through the options.
Hi there. So I've had the privilege of meeting many of you now at the various pop-up events James talked about. And I wanted to start with just a little reminder of overall what we're doing or what we're hoping to do. And it's been really helpful to have the feedback that you've given us because it's allowed us to develop the ideas that we're working on. So the first thing on both the houses at the top there and the flats below that we're hoping to do is to replace the existing windows with high performance triple glazed windows, because that will stop heat being lost so quickly through your windows. We're also expecting to put insulation on the outside of the roof and walls of all of the homes. And again, that will reduce heat loss through those elements. And then the third key thing that we're expecting to do is to install mechanical ventilation with heat recovery. And this will ensure that your homes are really well ventilated, but also don't actually lose excessive heat. Because sometimes at the moment, if heat's lost through the gaps and cracks in the building, you have to heat all this air up and then it goes out the window or the wall anyway. So this is a more efficient way of keeping the heat that you put into your home inside your home. So if we could go on to the next slide. So you want to look in slightly more detail at the feedback that we had from you since the first webinar and at the various pop-up events. So looking first at the windows, the really excellent thing from our perspective is that so many of you are positive about the idea of having triple glazed windows, and even more so that 94% of you are satisfied with whatever is most efficient. So we're really keen to be able to give you efficient windows that work well. And later we'll come on to a bit more detail about how they can work, how you might open them, what they can look like and so on, because there will be a change and there's an opportunity to make sure that that change is one that is really helpful to you guys. Next slide, please. And then also looking at the insulation that we're hoping to put onto the homes and the outside finish of that insulation. Again, really great that 80% of you were mainly positive about the idea of external wall insulation. It's a much more efficient way of insulating a wall than putting the insulation on the inside. So putting that insulation on the outside means we can keep the homes really cosy and warm, like a tea cozy over your house, keeping all the heat in. And as we've discussed before, we need to then put an external skin on that insulation to keep it dry and weatherproof. And many of you are positive about having a brick skin on the outside, which makes a lot of sense because that's obviously what you've got at the moment. But some people were also interested in having a render finish. And so we'll show you later some images of what both of those might look like, and hopefully seeing a sort of almost real idea of what it might be will help people have a bit more detailed discussion about what you'd like to see. Next slide, please. And then it's great also that loads of you are positive about the idea of mechanical ventilation with heat recovery. So as I said, it can help make sure, well, it will help make sure that homes are well ventilated, which is important for healthy indoor living conditions and avoiding mold and so on. But it also means that you're not losing the heat that you've paid to put into your building. So it helps keep you warm, but it also keeps your bills down. So all of these things that you guys have come back with such positivity about means that we've been able to develop these ideas in a bit more detail. And that's what my colleagues are going to come on to talk about with you now. So over to Laura.
Thank you, Lizzie. And yeah, next slide. Thank you. So before going through the slide, I wanted just to remind you that all of them, you can also find them in the booklet that you have received. So you can look at them with your own time and calm to absorb all the info, especially the following ones may be a bit intense in terms of content, but I'm gonna go through all of them, hopefully explaining them properly. So starting from Windows, first of all, well, as you know, we're going to replace all the windows, and there are choices to be made around how the window will open and the finishes, so how they will look like. So I'm going to run through the opening options in this slide, but again, as a reminder, in your booklet, you will have more pages that will explain more in details with more graphic and illustrations, how they basically, the opening mechanism will work. And also in the baseline, there are some frame samples that you can play with and better understand how to open, for example, the top hung reversible. So looking at this slide now, let's see, for example, the first two rows show a tilt and turn opening mechanism, while the second two rows shows top hung reversible. And then looking at the columns instead, there are a feature and characteristic of the windows that you may consider. For example, the first one is the U value. That may sound like a complicated thing, but in simple words is a unit that measures the heat loss through the window between the inside and the outside of your house, so between the rooms and the external ambient. And then when you see the security accreditation, especially when you see SDB, that means secured by design, which is a recognized standard for all security products, including Windows. And then other things to consider are the frame thickness, the internal and external finishes. And we will look at these two in particular, the last two things in the next slide, please. The first thing you may notice in this slide is the pink area at the bottom with a big question in it that indicates basically this is one of the questions you'll find in the survey that you have received. So again, just an invitation on your own time to fill it up. In this case, for example, you are invited to choose between the finishes options of the window frame. In this case, the internal color options. Next slide, please. So, as was discussed in the previous engagement event, heat is lost through the fabric of your building, and particularly at junctions like, for example, the wall and the roof, the wall and the windows, and the wall and the foundations, like is represented in the image here. So, on the right side, you see the colored images are thermographic images, and you see, especially on the lower one at the bottom, there is a yellow and red area. That one identifies the heat loss. In particular, you may notice at the junction, again, a crucial point of the fabric, the junction between the wall and the roof. Next slide, please. So always talking about external wall insulation, another thing to consider is the overall visual impact of the clothes. Residents can choose whether the insulation is finished with bricks or render, and you will see some visual images soon in the following slides. But for now, what we wanted to bring up is that is the following thing that is important to notice and to consider. As only socially rented and leasehold homes will be externally insulated, the detail between the new and the existing facade will need to be carefully designed to ensure a cohesive color scheme across the clothes. And again, this is something you are gonna look more in detail in the following slides. Next one, please.
I can see Susan's got her hand up there, Maria. Susan, do you want to ask a question?
Hello.
Hi,
Hello.
Susan. How are you?
Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yeah.
go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to query actually that on the page external wall insulation, it says as only socially rented homes will be undergoing refurbishment, but then you just added leaseholders. But I think you must have made a mistake and omitted the leaseholders there. In that sentence, as only socially rented homes, in my brochure, it doesn't mention leaseholders.
Okay, yeah. So to clarify, for leasehold flats, in terms of external wall insulation, windows and ventilation and the heating and hot water, they will be included. So all the elements we're talking about today will be available for leaseholders as well as tenants.
Yeah, it's just that needs to be corrected on that brochure, I think. So.
Thanks for that feedback. That's helpful.
Thank you, Susan. And next slide, thank you. Last thing I'm going to touch on external wall insulation is, again, as Lizzie was mentioning, following the first engagement, 80% were positive about it, and is worth reminding the benefits of the external wall insulation. So the first thing, of course, is the improved thermal comfort, and then less energy required to heat your home, and as a consequence of this, reduced bills. And last but not least, the less internal disruption. Another thing to consider also is that materials that are going to be used will be A1 and A2 rated. That means none or very limited combustibility. And again, we are going to touch on this, on the combustibility of the materials later on in another slide. But for now, I'm just going to pass it over to my colleague Phoebe, who is going to carry on talking about the external finishes options. Thank you.
Thank you, Lara. So I'm going to go through a few visuals that we've prepared. As we're adding insulation externally, this gives you some choices in terms of how your homes will look that we'd love to get your opinions on. We've prepared a series of images to show you some of these options and also have physical samples of each finish for you to look at in Unit 29. The first finish choice we've been looking at is brick slips, which use slices of real bricks to replicate an existing brick wall. And in the first visual, you can see what it might look like if we use a brick slip that is as close as possible to the one you have at the moment, which is shown here on the blocks of flats. And in the next image, so can I have the next slide, please? On the next image, you can see a close look at how this might look in the houses. You can get a better idea of how the thickness of the external wall insulation and roof insulation affects the appearance of the houses. I think with the staggered nature of the terraces, it allows the thickness of the walls insulation to kind of blend in It's not too noticeable, and you can get a quite close match with the bricks. On to the next slide. The next image shows another option we've been exploring is how to use different shades of brick that are complementary to the existing brick and each other, and kind of celebrate the differences in the buildings. And here you can again see it on the blocks of flats. In terms of colour choices, for the alternative brick slip colours, there's quite a range of choices we can choose from. So here's just an example of using a buff brick and a paler brick against the red existing bricks. Go to the next slide, please. And here you can kind of see a bit clearer how the external wall installation might look next to the existing bricks. So the existing are the red bricks, and then we kind of celebrate the differences, these alternative colours. Next slide, please. We've also been exploring a render option inspired by the local surroundings, where many of the buildings have render but still have areas of brickwork. So we decided to try and test out how that might look and share it with you. We developed this further in the next slide by incorporating 2 textures of render. Oh, sorry, next slide again, please. By incorporating 2 textures of render, one smooth and one rough, as you can see in the bottom left corner. We've done this to kind of bring more life to the facade, and by using the contrasting textures to emphasize the windows. Next slide, please. And here you are again on the houses. Next slide, please. The roof is also going to be insulated, which means that we have the choice to either replicate the existing concrete tiles or to change it. And here in the middle, you can see a picture of the low energy home, which we originally retrofitted, which features slate tiles. And on the picture on the right, you can see with the existing slate tiles next to it. So we could choose to replicate those, or go for more a fresher slate tiles. And obviously each home will be fitted with PV panels that will also affect the overall appearance. But it's this ultimately, all these appearance choices are down to your collective opinions. So we look forward to hearing your thoughts on those. Next slide, please. The dormer windows will also be being externally insulated, which means they will be thicker and have a thicker profile. So we're proposing to have a beveled style on the dormers to have a less bulky and more refined appearance. It also provides better solar shading and just overall a cleaner appearance. I think now I'm going to move on to the next slide and talk about the MVHR. Miss Maria?
Yes, the MVHR, as you know, is what we're going to be using to mechanically ventilate your properties. And at the moment, this sketch is just a strategic sketch indicating the possible routes that the ducting for the MVHR ducts might follow. So it's just strategic at this stage, but we are going to have to locally lower your ceilings to obviously take care of hiding these ducts. Now, what we are doing is integrating this into the design, and we are piloting different measures, a range of measures and ways of making this as discreet as possible. Next slide, please. So, for example, in this visual, you can see above the kitchen units, you can see a slightly very local bulkhead, and all that is doing is just hiding that duct, but it will be integrated with the design of the kitchen, so you will hardly notice it. And now we've got, this is just an example of what it might look like. As I say, we are just looking at a range of measures to minimize the impact these ducts within the properties. And we've got a little video that shows, you know, what this looks like as you move into the building. Thank you. Can we have the next slide, please? Yeah. And I'm going to pass on to our eminent engineer, Nigel, please.
Hi, Maria. I don't think Nigel's able to join us this evening, so I'll just cover this one briefly. In terms of the two MVHR units that we're looking at here, the Zender Comfort Air Q350 and the Brink Flare 325. These are the ones that we've sort of narrowed down from a wider comparison study. Obviously, this sheet is in the booklet. It's a bit unable to read as it is. And we've also featured the other sort of wider comparison study. And we'll be happy to discuss all these options further in more detail on Thursday at the drop-in session.
Okay. Yeah, obviously maximizing fire safety is a priority. We understand that this is extremely important to you, and it's obviously extremely important to all of us. And we just wanted to reassure you, because we are going through a very rigorous process assessing the fire safety of each building. We are looking at the combustibility of each material that is going to be put into your house or into the flats, and we are being very, very thorough. Obviously, we are going beyond what is required by building regulations, so you will end up with a very, very safe product at the end of the day. And could we have the next slide, please? This is an example of, for example, in the houses, what we are showing there is that you've got in the staircases will be protected. So there'll be very, very safe routes for escape. And also where the red dotted lines are, it shows the separation between one house and the house next to your property. And again, it's a fire line, if you like. So you will be also protected from, you know, from the property next to you if there was a fire next door. So we are looking at it very thoroughly and to ensure that there is safety throughout the whole design. Next slide, please. This is applicable to the flats, and we are working with Lancaster West to understand the remedial works that are being undertaken in the risers, and together with that, obviously, also each flat will be protected, and then the staircase will also be a protected means of escape. So we are looking at all this and going way, way beyond building regulations to ensure that this is all very safe. And next slide, please. As an example of what I was just referring to, this is just a combustibility, non-combustibility tracker. So what we are doing is we are tracking every single material, and we are checking the credentials of every single material, just to ensure that everything that is installed in these buildings is safe, and yeah, so that we can all, you know, just so that you can have peace of mind and be assured that it will be safe and fire protected. Next slide, please. I'm going to pass on to my colleague Laura now.
Thank you, Maria. And now we look at the progress we're doing and what we are aiming to achieve. So with Verity Close low energy home that has already been completed, the energy use of the home has been reduced. And now we are working on another pilot and try things out, learning lessons from the previous pilot and getting better as we go along. So the point of this is that by the time we'll design the whole close, we'll get the best possible outcome and the best details and design. Next slide, please. We're now looking at 2 slides that show real life examples, so basically precedents, and with comments of residents that shared what they thought after the work was completed. I'm going to read in particular one for you that I believe everyone can relate to, or at least most of us, I think, is going to be the bottom right from Catherine, a resident in a Birmingham retrofit project. And she says, quote, some of the room used to feel cold. So to keep warm, we would often spend most of our time in the living room with blankets. Now we don't use very much heating at all, and rooms stay warmer for much longer. So again, something I think most of us can relate. Next slide, please. In which you can see again other real life examples, and in particular I wanted to point to the central one that is one of our projects. So is ECD Architects project is a award-winning one in Portsmouth, and is a Wilmcote House. Again, a sustainable project, and it's just to say that ECD has been doing this kind of project since more than 40 years, and you are in good hands. Next slide, please. Last thing I'm gonna touch personally are surveys. So we want, we would like to get as much survey, let's say more surveys as possible, and basically the more we get, the better, and it will indeed help us to get the best outcome. So if you are interested, you can get in touch and we will give you more details regarding each one of them, because of course they are different. The dump survey is going to be different from the structural survey and so on. But please get in touch. And again, just last thing, I wanted to again take the opportunity to thank all the people that already came forward to volunteer for and opening their home to allow us to carry on some surveys. Now I'm going to pass it to Janet from the Lancaster West Neighbourhood Team. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm part of the Heat Network team. I'm the resident engagement manager. So I've kind of been working across the estate with each different block to look at our future heating and hot water solution for the estate. We're looking to install something estate-wide that addresses all the existing heating problems and replaces the temporary boiler outside Testerton Walk. And repairs the kind of failing pipe work and actually replaces it across the estate as well. So Verity Close is obviously quite a different position, having combi boilers. 80% of the estate today is connected to communal networks, but there are 3 blocks on the estate who have individual boilers at the moment. So the experience of heating across Lancaster West is quite different for different residents. It really depends on what block you're living in and the current kind of condition of your heating system. So Verity Close is maybe quite a bit better than others, but on this diagram on the left, you can see we've got lots of kind of red traffic lights that are signalling a lot of residents aren't happy with the heating service they've got currently. So yeah, next slide. Over the last year, we have been asking for resident opinions on the heating and hot water system in your home today and what your future aspirations for heating are. So some of the questions we asked you were about what your priorities are for that heating, we find that installing better controls and making sure that the heating itself is actually affordable and sustainability featured in that top 3. The other thing that we learned, which is really important, is that actually only about 40% of residents are heating their homes to the level that they find comfortable. And so we realised that there's quite an extensive problem in that people are either rationing heat or are finding that they have overheating in their homes currently. So that's another issue that we have to deal with. We've also held a number of focus groups as well as surveys, and we've been able to collect much more kind of detailed information from residents on specific things that we can actually incorporate into the future heating for residents. So we are looking at our pricing models. We're looking at using solar panels across the estate potentially. And then we've got also heating pilots going on to test different controls and what benefits that those can bring to residents. You've also told us that you would actually like to be involved in the kind of long-term design and then the management of the heat network. So we have a plan to involve residents in that kind of long-term management of your heating also. Next slide. And so just drilling down a bit into what you've told us about the heating on Verity Close today. As I mentioned, it is a lot more positive than the rest of the estate. And people like being able to select their energy provider, although some people also have found their energy providers disappointing. And that's maybe a changing situation as well. We surveyed households about a year ago, and there have been a lot of changes in the energy market. So we understand that people might feel differently about their gas boilers and their heating today also. So it's a very much a live situation, and definitely welcome your comments. I'll be at the pop-up this Thursday in Verity Close. Next slide. So this is just a longer list of options that we've reviewed for new heating across the estate. As I mentioned, we're looking for an estate-wide option, and this is really an opportunity to address not only the existing heating issues, but what it means to go renewable and to reduce our carbon footprint, to become carbon neutral on the estate, and how we can do that. So we've looked at the energy efficiency, we've looked at the durability and reliability, and the cost of installation, and then the cost of actually buying the heat itself for 3 different options. The first one being electric radiators, the second an individual air source heat pump, and the third being the renewable heat network. And you can see in this 3 out of 4 measures, the renewable heat network outperforms the other options that we've looked at, and was selected as the preferred option to install across the estate. Next slide, please. And so taking us back to basics, what is a renewable heat network? It is essentially plumbing at a large scale. Heat is produced by a renewable technology. In this case, we're using air source heat pumps at an energy centre that will be hopefully located actually on the estate. And then heat is delivered through underground pipes to individual buildings and homes. This is going to hopefully replace gas boilers across the state. So we have 2 communal gas boilers that will definitely be replaced. And then there is the opportunity for individual homes with gas boilers today also to plug into the heat network. Next slide. So this is just a bit of a recap about how it works. So I mentioned the local energy centre will use air source heat pumps. There is a potential that we'll be able to supply it with electricity from rooftop solar panels on the estate. And there will be heat delivered through the through the underground pipes to individual homes. And then the billing will be done on a pay-by-use basis via the council. Next slide. So this is a bit of an outline about what would actually be installed in your home if you decided to connect to the heat network. Gas boilers would be replaced with this box called a heat interface unit on the left. It's virtually the same size as a standard combi boiler. You can get some very fancy versions that are very slimline, but most of them are the same size as a gas boiler. It's got quite a few advantages in that it transfers heat. It doesn't actually have a flame inside it. We don't have to burn any fuel within homes. It's a very kind of clean technology to have in your home. And then the other kind of elements of what would be installed in your home are probably quite familiar. So we've got standard kind of wet radiators and thermostats that are being trialled across this state as well. Next slide. And so just to give you a bit of an overview about what the heat network can deliver. And the first thing is that it's future-proof. So the UK government is bringing in legislation to wind down the gas network nationally. And there's some target dates in there that we won't actually be installing new boilers in the UK from 2035. And that they will kind of be run down in terms of manufacturing, and that they'll basically disappear as an option. So we really want to give every household the opportunity to connect to the heat network before that happens, and supply renewable energy to everyone. The UK government has recognised kind of the benefits and kind of are quite excited about the scalability of this project and have given us a 1.1 million grant to support that renewable energy element specifically. And it's hassle-free, and so the kind of gas boiler checks and maintenance are actually included as part of the general service of it being installed. And then also that it's actually local energy and it's locally produced. So instead of dealing with kind of the national gas companies, you can deal with your local energy supplier literally on your doorstep. And then finally, as I mentioned before, health and safety. This system will improve air quality in homes and locally, as you won't have to burn gas within your home. There's no kind of fumes, there's no carbon dioxide produced, so we're improving local air quality significantly too. Next slide. And finally, moving on to affordability. So actually installing the heat network is potentially an affordable way to replace your gas boiler. And I'm maybe talking here specifically to freeholders actually, because this is going to be coming in to leaseholders and tenanted properties anyhow. The heat network provides cost-effective heat, so we can actually use communal electricity to offset the costs. We can access cheaper commercial electricity prices to run their source heat pump. So that commercial electricity is always at a markdown of what you would pay your electricity supplier. So it's cheaper than running an air source heat pump individually. And then finally, we've actually been working on developing a resident price promise with residents. And there'll be more information shared in this soon, but the overall aim of that price promise is that residents won't pay any more than gas heating until 2030. So we're locking in the price at something that's kind of equitable to what you're paying in Verity Close today. Next slide. And just to give a general overview of how your heating system would change, on Verity Close, there's actually very little change in that you already have a wet system, you already have an independent boiler and heat controls, and are able to control your heating. None of that would change under a new heat network. You would still be able to control your heating as you would today. The only change would really be that you have smarter, better controls, and that you would, instead of paying the gas provider, would now be paying the council for your heating instead. Next slide. So when will renewable heat be available? So the plan is that And the heat network will actually be installed alongside the refurbishment works. So homes will be made ready through the refurbishment to connect to the heat network, and that properties from 2024 would be able to connect to the heat network when the energy centre construction is complete. Next slide. And so the co-design for the heat network will continue over the next few months. I will be bringing a lot of boards along with me to the pop-ups happening across the state to explain a bit more about the heat network. We will have a local energy centre co-design, and we're looking at options for the location and the design of that, and we'll bring that to residents as soon as we can. We're starting to plan field trips for residents to look at other similar energy centres across London and see what they look like. And then finally, we're also doing some trial heat meter installations as well to help residents just get a better idea of how much heat they currently need and what they're likely to need in the future. So we've got the survey, there's heat network questions included within the phase 2 survey. And if anyone's interested in kind of generally finding out more or supporting the heat network project, and especially with outreach to other residents, then please contact me, and my email is at the bottom here, and I'll put it in the chat. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Janet. If we could go to the next slide, Molly, that's great. Thank you. Thanks, ECD, also for the presentation. Before I go through the final slides, does anyone have any comments or questions for the team? David? David, I can see you've got your hand up. Can you, are you able to unmute? I think we're having some technical difficulties here, unless anyone can. James, I'm not sure whether you can see anything in the chat. Yeah, you do have permission to use the mic, so I'm not sure.
No.
I did check that.
Going to try making him a presenter.
Yeah, good shout.
Hopefully now you can unmute yourself, David.
There we go.
Some slides ready.
Thank you.
Apologies.
Couple of questions. Have back doors been considered for the houses? You mentioned windows, but obviously the houses have got back doors, so we would need triple glazed back doors as well. So what options are you looking into for those? Or have you forgotten those?
I don't think we haven't forgotten them. We're well aware that you need new doors, but we haven't yet got as many sort of options, I suppose, partly because I guess the opening function of the door is less complicated than the windows. There are fewer choices there. Pretty sure it's going to be a side hung door. But you're quite right. We haven't offered you choices for that yet. And that is something that we need to talk to you about. So thank you for the reminder. And we will come back to you with some door options, because you're quite right, both front and back doors need to be replaced, and there may be different a different option for front and back. So I imagine there's some space on the survey for any other thoughts. So if anyone has a strong opinion about front or back doors, please feel free to give us some free text on what you'd like the doors to be like, but we'll also come back with some options on those.
I think with the front doors, we've just the main council's gone through with the new fire doors, so we think many people may have already chosen a new front door.
You're quite right. Thank you. Yes.
the windows and EWI, does there need to be a consensus across all residents? So, for example, if one resident wanted one choice of window and a different resident wanted a different choice, are they able to do that, or does there have to be kind of consensus across the lot?
I'm happy to try and answer. Although James or Alfie may have an opinion.
Yeah,
Please do.
Should I come in on that one? I think in terms of the windows, we would be looking for a consensus, largely just from a technical consistency point of view, and in terms of procurement. I think on the EWI, and this is where, Lizzie, I might bring you or Alfie in. I think initially it would be good to just get a sense of where people are at. Now, David, you and I have discussed about the differences between the houses and the flats. Obviously, the flats, it would need to be something consistent. We're also reviewing 4 different types of system that do offer different types of facade. And of course, we're not a million miles away from Portobello, where they make a very strong aesthetic statement around having the differences of facade. So I think with Verity Close, this is the first time we're really sharing aesthetics, so we'll see what comes back. If there is strong differences of opinion, we can absolutely discuss that. I mean, the houses, for example, you know, although they're council houses, they're your homes, and there is a strong sense of individual identity. So I think certainly in terms of the technical side of it, it would need to be consistent in terms of the system we use. But in terms of, say, the colour of the brick slip and things, there's nothing necessarily, I think I'm right, Lizzie, in saying to stop people choosing different options if they wished for the houses.
I think there's certainly the potential to have some choice, but again, there will be we'll have to be mindful of sort of procurement considerations where it's there's a sort of minimum order or something, so that it could become a little more expensive if we start having lots of different things. And then the other thing is, of course, we need to discuss all this with the local authority planners. Now, I think largely, if you guys are all behind it, then they'll be behind it. But I don't want to make promises that I don't have the power to keep. So we'll just have to work with you, but also with them, to work out a strategy that works sort of price-wise, aesthetics, planning-wise, because obviously your opinions are the most important, but there are some other things too that we can't completely, unfortunately, throw out the window.
Thank you. The tenanted houses currently have half and half windows. Not sure what the technical term is.
Different finishes.
For them. Is there no option for something similar? Because at the moment, the options just seem to be the full window opens rather than having half of it open. If that makes sense.
I do see what you mean, and I think that that is also a detail that we can discuss in more detail, as it were, because I appreciate that there are different rooms with different functions, and we want to make sure that everyone feels able that they can easily open their windows and indeed easily clean their windows. So we wanted to look kind of first at how the opening parts of the windows might function, but I agree that particularly some of the ground floor windows in the kitchens and so on, where you've got quite big openings, you probably don't want just one big window. So we need to, I guess we'd hope to make some propositions around what we think might work well, and then get more details as we come into our phase 3 of engagement.
Okay, cool, thank you. Will there need to be a full suite of surveys for all the properties before you carry out any work? So you need to go into every flat, every house to do the surveys, or do you only need a sample across a lot?
Some surveys we don't need to do in every house. So, for example, making sure we understand the structure of the flats. I mean, we fairly much do already, but you don't need to go into every flat to be sure about how the flats are put together. But we would like to have a survey in every flat to make sure that there isn't, say, a particular damp problem in a flat, because if we didn't find out that there was a problem and then we start putting insulation on the outside, we might end up exacerbating that problem. So we're really keen to get into all the homes for a survey at some point, but some of the more in-depth surveys we don't need to do in all the homes. So thank you to everyone, as Lara said, who's already volunteered for surveys. There are more things we'd like to do in some particular homes, particularly I know to the north of the site. There's sort of more issues with damp in some of the walls at the base of the flats and some of the houses. So there we're really keen to get into as many homes as possible, particularly at the ground floor flats and so on. But we don't need to do such extensive surveying in absolutely every home before we start. But obviously, ultimately, as the work gets carried out, particularly in terms of installing the MVHR and in tenanted homes where there should be new kitchens and bathrooms, there will ultimately be people coming into those flats. And so also absolutely making sure that the fire compartmentation between homes is in place. That's obviously really key. And so again, to ensure the best possible outcome as a result of all of this work, we'd really like to do the kind of a baseline of surveying in every home, but some of that might wait until we're really close to doing the work so that you're not kind of constantly disrupted.
Okay, thank you.
And thank you so much, David, for all the surveying you've allowed us to do in your home, because it's really helpful.
You're very welcome. Will residents have a choice in terms of whether or not, I suppose this would be a question for James, whether or not they have any of these works carried out or only some of them? Or will you kind of be forcing it on?
Yeah, no, really good question. And in the case of Verity Close, we've got the flats and then we've got the houses, and they'll probably be slightly different. So in terms of our flats, there are certain things, and with regards to any leaseholders who are listening, where in this borough leaseholders aren't able to opt out. So in some boroughs, leaseholders could say opt out of something like certainly windows, for example, external wall insulation in some instances, more so in houses and low rise. I've seen that before. In our case, that's not the position. So for those of you in flats, we would need to come up with an approach which would be applied to tenanted flats as well as leasehold flats. I think there's two types of work really. There's work which we need to do from a landlord's perspective and to improve the performance of your buildings, ventilation being one of them. And then there are more elective works, if you like, which residents would probably see and use more in terms of kitchens and bathrooms and decorative fixtures and fittings and so on. What we will try to do is come up with as many options as possible, because the last place we want to be is where we are forcing anything on residents in the context that we're operating on. And so what we are doing through the piloting process that we've adopted really well is taking the learning to go back and improve. So certainly with things like the concerns around MVHR ductwork, which we seem to be able to fit within the same ceiling height as our internal refurbishment programme. We're currently trialling 2 or 3 different methods and different approaches to ductwork, which also includes providing a more bulkhead approach, which basically means that similar to if you go into a hotel room and all of your mechanical and electrical gubbins are in the hallway, and then you have the vents on the vertical face of the wall rather than horizontally coming off the ceiling. So we're trying a range of different measures so that if there are residents who want minimal disruption, we can try and work around that. And I'm quite hopeful with Verity Close, given the configuration we've got, particularly the houses. I think certainly on the inside of those houses, residents will have quite a high degree of choice, because you haven't got the same interplay as you do with flatted blocks.
That's cool, because I think there's going to be some residents that won't want that level of disruption, in terms of having the MVHR or even potentially having a new roof installed. For the houses, are you looking to put batteries in for the PV?
I would have thought so, Lizzie.
I wish Nigel were here, our M&E engineer. We are looking at it, I think would be the right answer for now. Certainly, it obviously makes more use of the energy that you're creating. But obviously there's a cost and a spatial implication to those, so we need to kind of refine it and also work out what's happening with the flats might be slightly different from the houses, and also with Janet, what's happening with the heat network, where energy is feeding into that and where energy is going directly to the user, and that will make a difference to the efficiency that batteries can offer us.
Thank you. I suppose the last question on this is the timelines. When would you be looking to start this, and how long do you think it would take?
So I think depending on what comes out of the surveys, because ultimately, you know, we need to hear from yourselves in terms of looking for that consensus, but we would absolutely be looking to be on site on Verity Close this year and starting to deliver the first external transformation of homes. To be candid, we are obviously having these conversations across the estate, and whilst we have got a good budget, we have still a finite budget, and we need to review in the round what residents are choosing and what different blocks need across the estate. We're hearing loud and clear a lot of concern around disruption as well. So aside from cost pressures, we're getting residents say sometimes to us, actually, we don't want everything done at one go. We would rather phase things, and it may well be the case that we do works over a greater number of years than perhaps originally envisaged to help us manage that. But certainly once we've locked in our final designs, which we're hoping to be the case in the next 2 to 3 months, at least for most of the estate, we'll be able to develop a master programme, but we'll absolutely work with you. So it may well be that if residents of Verity Close say, actually, let's get it all done now, then we can try and factor that in. It might well be that some people say, actually, you know, for the reasons you're alluding to, David, someone says, well, it's not right for me now, come back in a couple of years and all of that. Now we have to temper that with procurement and getting contractors on board who will work with that level of not necessarily uncertainty, but phasing. And I think the good thing with Verity Close, and it's often the reason why we start there at every iteration of the process, is it's small enough to be able to work in many cases on a property by property basis, but it's large enough to look at scaling. But certainly in terms of starting to deliver that transformation from the outside across every part of the estate, we will be looking to start that as soon as residents have made a decision and we're able to go to market and bring on the contractors who can deliver that change.
Thank you. And kind of touching on the disruption, will the respite offers, including potentially a temporary decant, be open to all types of residents? Because I'm concerned with the houses. You've got tenanted and freehold houses that are going to be sandwiched in between tenanted properties, so they're going to be getting noise from potentially both sides. What options will be there? Will there be for them?
Yeah, that's a great question. So Nordy and Linda and the team have developed a new respite offer that we've very recently launched. It's available from Baseline and also on our app. And I think the first thing that we've definitely learned is there isn't a one size fits all. Now, in terms of tenants and resident leaseholders, where we'll be doing intrusive works inside those properties, we would absolutely look to be able to provide temporary decant options for people. For tenants, that would include permanent decants through the refurbishment decant scheme, which for obvious reasons we wouldn't necessarily offer to leaseholders. In terms of freeholders, we're not doing or not proposing to do any significant works in or around their property. It might well be where the roofs join or the EWI and so on. But you're quite right, David, in terms of they're potentially affected by the noise. Now, the good thing is we've only got 16 freeholders, so a relatively small amount. And I think we can absolutely look to support them in terms of mitigating noise. I don't think we would be in a position, because we've only got a finite amount of properties, to be able to offer temporary decants to stay in. And obviously, in terms of the evening, the work should cease. But certainly, if you've got someone working from home and there's an issue, we'll do all we can to provide somewhere where they can work from. And so I think it's a really good point that is particular to Verity. but we won't be in a position to offer, I think, temporary decants to freeholders, but absolutely in terms of disruption that they experience throughout the works, we'll do all we can because they're, you know, part of our community as well.
Yeah, thank you. And my very last question will be for Janet around the heat network. We've had this discussion at the previous meeting, but the Verity Close doesn't have any of the infrastructure for the heat network. There's none of the pipe work to come into any of the properties. Will those works be aligned with the phase 2, or these works, the external insulation works? Because what we don't want is to have, by the sounds of it, the works in Verity Close are going to start this year, but then you're going to have to come back and dig up roads and entry point into houses to put the pipe works in for heating and hot water. So I'm just a bit concerned about kind of the joined up works and the level of disruption that's going to be involved in doing that, because it's a good idea. It's a great idea to get very close on the heat network, but I just think there's going to be a huge amount of disruption for everyone in Verity. I think it's going to be a bit of a hard sell potentially.
So you're completely right in kind of pointing out that the works will be aligned to the refurbishment. There will be a need probably to fit some kind of external pipe work, whether that happens alongside kind of external wall insulation happening and that kind of work. We haven't got to that level of detail yet. I suspect that kind of work will happen in tandem. So all pipe work kind of around the property could be installed, and then kind of a later kind of road connection happens. So I think that the plan will be to minimise the disruption to residents wherever we can, and that may mean putting in pipe work early or later, or and capping it off temporarily if that needs be. And that's something quite commonly done, and is quite easy to kind of just replace a gas boiler with a heat interface unit, because the pipe work itself is very similar at both ends, connecting to the heat network and connecting through your property. So it's a manageable situation that heat network installers will have come across before. So I think we're quite confident that we can really get that to be quite a slick operation for residents in Verity Close.
If I could just build on that, Janet. So obviously we've been delivering a voids and internal refurbishment programme for some time now. 36% of all tenanted properties across the estate have benefited from internal refurbishment, and 28% of the same number of homes have had entirely new internal plumbing delivered. Now, for those already on the heat network, that's often connected to an unvented cylinder, which gives them some resilience. Obviously, in the case of Verity Close, Camborne and Treadgold, that's rigged up to your existing gas combi boiler. But we've checked with our design team, and they've said that should be compatible, notwithstanding the removal of the gas and the pipework for the gas, and replaced with the HRU. So I think one of the things which, you know, I would say to people is we are building up some momentum in terms of what we're looking to design and deliver. But you're quite right, in terms of that primary network will require substantial work, and that's where joining up the work so it does more than one thing. So some residents have talked about whether we redesign the car park, look at bringing in electric vehicle chargers. Some people have talked about, you know, looking at the landscape area, which we've recently secured some funding for. So what we will absolutely try to do is combine as many packages of work as possible to minimise that disruption. But you're quite right, David, there will be the need for quite substantial work to be done to provide this opportunity to the Verity residents.
Thank you. That's it, I'm done. I'd be glad to know.
Sure.
Thanks, David. We just had another comment in the chat about sound insulation. Lizzie or Maria or Laura, I don't know whether you want to touch on that in terms of the options that we've been looking at, because I know it's quite high up there on the top 10s.
Sure. This I think was particular to the flats, although I'm aware that there are also issues with that in the houses. But I think the person who asked the question was sorry, I can't now see the question. It was particularly to do with the flats. Anyway, in the houses you've got concrete floors. It is possible to put a sort of damping layer on those, and that will reduce sound transfer, both impact sound and airborne sound, passing from one, particularly from above to below, but also to some extent airborne sound coming from the flat below. It is, however, of course, quite disruptive to install that in a home, because you need to, it's really important that you cover the whole floor, because if there are gaps, then the sound will find its way through. So it is quite disruptive, and then you end up sort of looking at new floor finish and so on top of that, or replacing the existing floor finish above that layer. It's also possible to have a more sound absorbing or ceiling, so that can stop sound again coming from above getting into your room below. And as I guess as we are putting in new ceilings along with the MVHR ductwork, making sure that board is the right board, an acoustically absorbent board, and also where there's space, potentially installing some acoustic insulation above that could be of some benefit. One of the difficulties with sound is that you can do lots and lots of things, and then there's always one little bit that creeps through. So I don't want to promise you it's going to be perfect afterwards, but I think in the flats there's probably quite a lot we can do to improve sound transfer between the flats above and below. Walls between flats are a little more tricky, because inevitably if we were to install any insulation to stop sound transfer between those walls, that's going to impinge on your living space, because it's going to take up some space, and again also quite disruptive, because that's sort of covering the entire wall. So as I guess you can hear from my voice, it's something we're still looking at, and also need to work with Lancaster West about which homes there's the capacity to install that in on. So that makes sense, to install acoustic insulation in, sort of along with other internal refurbishments.
Yeah,
I hope that's a bit helpful.
David asked, would we be putting insulation in the floors of leaseholder flats? James, I think
no, that wouldn't be something we would be looking to do as a standard. That said, going back to my previous point, there is a lot of work we will need to do in leaseholder flats, and I think that if the opportunity emerges to improve something like soundproofing between flats and properties, then that's something we can do. I think certainly in terms of once we get into the individualised surveys, we really want to understand what affects particular residents and bespoke the approach that we take. The issue we've got with leaseholders is not so much necessarily putting in the element of floor insulation, it's all the enabling works and making good after in terms of kitchens, bathrooms, furnishings and decorations. So it wouldn't be something we're looking to put in a standard, but if there's a particular issue, we can see if we can find a way round to try and improve the issue that probably some leaseholders are experiencing.
Thanks for that. Any more questions, or I'll run through the slide that we've got in front of us. Cool. Okay, just to say, in terms of the next steps, we'll be holding a drop-in session at Baseline Studios this Thursday, the 3rd of February, from 3 till 7. And you can see on the slide here that there are a myriad of ways for you as residents to have your say on what's being presented tonight. The paper survey, which you should have received in the post, or the online survey, which you can see by scanning the QR code on the screen. If you'd like to ask any further questions in the meantime to us before the survey deadline, of Friday the 18th of February, you can text or WhatsApp us on 07814 608 999. Next slide, please, Molly. And I'd also like to mention the door entry pilots, which are based in Unit 29 at the moment. So we've just connected up the Firmax models and we're gathering feedback on the Hikvision system. We'd love to hear your thoughts on these and can also provide these additional surveys on Thursday if requested. Over the next month as well, we'll also be launching Firmax with some of their sort of reps coming down and explaining how they work. Next slide, please, Molly. Firstly, I'd like to thank everyone for their attendance tonight and draw you to the e-newsletter for the Lancaster West estate. It's the best way to keep up to date with all the refurbishment news specifically for Verity Close or your respective block. So you can either scan the QR code or follow the link, which should be put in the chat soon. And there are also posters up on notice boards around the estate with the QR code too. Thanks, Rebecca. And you can also find it on our Instagram at Lancaster West Neighbourhood Team. So when you subscribe, you have the option to put in your block name and respective and receive specific block newsletters. That's one of the ways we'll be keeping you up to date with the refurbishment plans. A recording of this meeting will be going up onto our YouTube channel and also embedded in our We Are W11 app, which you can download from the App Store, and on our website www.wearew11.org. If you do have any further questions or comments about this presentation or anything else, then please just get in touch with the team at lanquestrefurb@rbkc.gov.uk. And lastly, thanks to everyone again, and I hope to see you all at Baseline on Thursday. Thanks all.